Hey everyone, I've been using Maya for over a decade, but I still remember how scary the interface was when I first started. So I just wanted to take a few minutes and kind of go over the interface and just kind of explain some of how Maya is laid out. So let's start at the top left-hand corner here. At the very top, we have really what you'd find in pretty much any application. You have all of your different menus, right? So file, being able to open, save. A lot of this is pretty straightforward. But after this Windows menu, all of these menus change out. So right now, you can see things like mesh, edit mesh. These are all modeling tools. So we can change this out by using what's called menu sets. So the menu sets are right here. So let's say we want to focus on rigging. You notice all of these menus then change out. So you have rigging, animation, effects, rendering, or you can even customize to get maybe a mixture of some modeling, some rigging, whatever sort of menus that you want. Now, one of the things that I've kind of learned in my career with Maya is it's extremely customizable. So as we're going through this, I'll kind of show some of my favorite tips and tricks for customizing the interface or even just working a little bit faster. So for example, you can access all of these different menus, including all of the different menu sets, using what's called the hotbox. Now the hotbox is in this workspace right here. Right, so this is your viewport, kind of where you would see the 3D model. But if you hold down the space bar, you'll get all of these different menus. Now, if you don't see all of these, it's because they're not all enabled by default. You can set that here in the hotbox controls. So you can tell it what you want to show. So you can show or hide your rigging. Say if we want to hide everything, right? So if this is all you see, you can come in and change what types of menus you see. So if I'm seeing rendering only, so you can see that. And then that's my rendering tools right here. So you can see those. I usually like to just show everything because that way I can come in and really access everything that I want all at once. So if I need my modeling tools, they're right here. If I need my rigging tools, animation, effects, and rendering. And then all of the default ones, file, edit, things like that. So that's my preference, is to work with the hotbox as far as the menus are concerned. So continuing right along on the right-hand side of the menu sets, you have what's called the status line. Now, the status line really has, once again, some pretty basic things like creating a new scene, opening a scene, saving, stuff like that. But you can show and hide a lot of these different things using these little lines right here. So if you notice just this one line, that means that this is open. But if you notice the little arrow, that means that there's something there that you can show. So a set of icons, right? So by default, not all of these are shown, but you can actually show and hide what you want depending on what you're working with. So say I'm not modeling or something, so I don't really care about these snapping tools. I can hide that, which means I could open this up here and then choose maybe these selection tools. So these are to enable or disable certain selections. All right, so that is the status line. Now beneath all of this, we have this big area right here. And these are the shelves in Maya. So there's some default shelves. These are all the default shelves that you get when you install Maya. Things like your surfacing tools, so building curves, NURBS surfacing. You have your polygon meshes and polygon editing tools. A lot of the same sort of things that you'll find in your modeling menu set. So a lot of your polygon tools, polygon mesh tools, your curves and surfacing tools are in these first two. You have your sculpting. So this is actually kind of new in Maya 2016. Autodesk, because they own Mudbox, they ported a lot of the sculpting tools from Mudbox directly inside of Maya, so you can access a lot of those here. You have rigging, animation, a lot of these different tools here that you can access and kind of go through. Now, there is a custom shelf that gets created for you by default, but you can actually customize really any of these shelves. So let's say in my rendering, let's say I wanted to add something new to it. So let's come into our rendering menu, and I don't know, let's just say I want to add my rendering settings to this. So what I want to be able to do is add that on here. So if I hold down Control and Shift and then select that, you'll see that that gets added to whatever shelf I have available. So now I just click on that and that's going to pop open my render settings. And we can do that with really anything that we want. Now, if we want to get rid of this, we could right click, delete it. We can edit it if we need to. So really this is just a command line, or rather a script, right? So that's just the command that's running. We could edit this if we wanted to. If you're familiar with Mel or Python, you can really customize this however you want. Now you can edit your shelves over here. So you have the ability to turn on and off your tabs. So that's these right here. So say if you want to turn those off, you could do that. And then you can access everything right here. So just saves a little bit of space in your user interface if you wanted to do that. So you can switch between those using this little guy right here. But you can hop into the shelf editor and really get some full control over what's in your shelves. So let's say if you're adding in some custom things, say with our rendering, the new tool or the new thing that we had there. So we didn't really want this default icon that it creates. We could actually add in a new icon if we wanted to, browse to it, really create whatever we want. Those icons, I believe, have to be 32 by 32 pixels, and in order to fit in that resolution, in that little space right there. So let's close out of this. That's how you can customize the shelf. Now, beneath it, we kind of talked a little bit, but this is the overall workspace. And then you have the actual panel toolbar, which is this right here. In the panel toolbar, you'll be able to do things like look through the camera or choose basically what's showing in this particular viewport. Now, there's something I want to point out about this viewport is that you can have multiple viewports. So let's come in. I'm going to create something. Let's just maybe create a cube just so we can have something in here to be able to see. Okay, so we have this in here, and let's say we wanted to change this to be wireframe. Well, we could do that by switching this here. So this one is wireframe, but I can actually set up multiple views like this. So let's say I wanted to come in and let's create a new, or tear off a copy here. So here is a new perspective view. And this one, let's say I want it to be smooth shaded, right? So I'm really using the same camera here in these two different views. I could pull this over, and this is something I like to do a lot of times when especially when I'm modeling. I'll pull off the view and then actually bring this over to my second monitor, which I can't do here, otherwise you won't see it in the video. But that really helps me be able to see things a lot better, because then I can move. You can see it's moving. I'm using the same camera, but I can see it in different views, which can be really, really helpful. Again, especially if you're doing modeling or things like that, where you need to be able to see the different edges and vertices and stuff like that. So you'll notice I'm navigating around. How am I navigating around in the viewport? That's really something that's very, very important. So to navigate around, you're going to hold down the Alt key on your keyboard and then left click and drag in order to rotate around. Or with the Alt key held down, you middle click and drag in order to pan around your scene. And then with the Alt key held down, right click and drag in and out in order to dolly your camera in and out. So that's really how you're navigating around in the Maya viewport. Something that's really helpful too, that I find really helps with the navigation, is the ability to focus on an object. So just to illustrate this, let's come in. I'm going to create a new object. Let's take this guy and let's just move it really far away. So let's say, okay, I'm working with these two things, and I got to zoom in over here, and then I got to come over here and zoom in over here. You could do that, but especially, you notice it's starting to slow down, and it's just kind of really not working too well. Can kind of get to be inefficient. What you can do is you can select an object and then just hit F, and that will focus in on that object, which can really save a lot of time, because then I can just zoom out, focus, or even just from over here, select it and then focus in, hit F on the keyboard in order to jump between your different objects. And then you'll notice as I'm orbiting around, when I focus this, it's really focused on that particular area. Now, what's nice about this is it doesn't have to be just an entire object. You could actually focus on some components. So let's say I wanted to focus on just these faces. I could F in order to focus in on that. Really helpful for when you're modeling or like painting weights or things like that. You really want to focus on a particular area of your mesh. All right, so since we're talking about viewing, let's talk about, we have wireframes. The wireframe here, you saw I switched to shaded view. You can use hotkeys in order to do this. So 4 will get to your wireframe, 5 will get to the shaded view, 6 will turn on any textures that you have. I don't have any textures on this particular model, but if I did, you would be able to see them in the viewport. 7 will turn on your lights. So I don't have any lights, which is why this turns completely black. But if I were to create a light, let's create something like a spotlight. And then I'm going to come in and look through my spotlight here. Just kind of focus it in on that. There we go. And then using hotbox space, get back to my perspective, left click, and then drag up in order to get back to my perspective. Now you can see the light in there. So if I maybe go back to 5, this is the shaded. 7, I can see the lighting. Now this is not going to give you a full quality render, really. It's really just intended for preview, but it's a great way of being able to see kind of where the light is being cast in your scene and things like that. All right, so again, it's 4 for wireframe, 5 for shaded view, 6 for shaded with textures. You can see it showing there. And then 7 for lights. So what about 1, 2, and 3? 1, 2, and 3 use are to display different smoothing levels of your polygon meshes. So if I hit 1 here, I'm really not going to see much of a difference. Let's come in here. I want to select my subdivisions and let's bring them down quite a bit. So we have really faceted view here. So we can see this, just kind of illustrate this a little bit more. So if I hit 1, you can see it's very faceted. If I hit 2, you can see it smoothing it, but we can still see the cage of what the original is. So at this point, if I right click, go into my edges, I can select those and start to affect my mesh that way. It's really helpful for modeling. And then 3 is going to show me just the smoothed preview. So this is the smooth mesh preview, and we can actually render this if we're using something like Mental Ray. So you don't actually have to add in all of that resolution while you're modeling. You can do that at render time. It's really, really helpful and really helps speed up your workflow, make things a lot easier, because the less resolution that you're working with when you're modeling, the less complex your models are going to get. All right, so a lot of the stuff that we had covered, you can adjust in here as well. So just using some of these little guys here. So let's say we want to turn on off the grid, we could do that. If we want to switch between our shaded view and wireframe view, so 4 and 5, you can use these, textured, and then wireframe unshaded. If you wanted to see your wireframe on shaded, you can do that. A lot of that stuff you can do in here as well, right? So in the shading menu, these icons are just a little bit faster. Now, if you want to be able to hide this, you can hold Shift M in order to hide your menu bar, rather. These guys here. Once again, just saving a little bit of space. I know there's been times where I've accidentally hit Shift M and that disappears, and then I'm like, oh, I don't know how to get it back. Well, you can do that by using Shift M. All right, so before we jump into the tools here, let's look at these guys down here because we're talking about the viewport. So with the viewport, you have the ability to, as I mentioned before, use different cameras or have different views. So I'm going to hop into this one right here. This is the 4 view. So we have our perspective camera, our top camera, our front camera, and our side camera. Now we can customize this however we want. So if you remember before, I had one of my perspective camera, and then I had another view of the perspective camera torn off. Well, we could do that in here. Let's say if we select this, you notice the little light gray box around there. So as I click, I'm left clicking in these viewports in order to highlight in there. When I do that, I could hold down spacebar in order to get to my hotbox, switch this to a perspective view, and now I have 2 perspective views, right? which could be cool, but we can even create custom cameras in order to really be able to see things from different angles at the same time. So let's say I'm going to come in, create a new camera. There we go. This is my camera 1. And then in this panel, I'm going to select panels, look through selected because I have the camera selected. And now it's kind of hard to see with the sphere since it's perfect on all sides. Let's maybe create something like a cube and just kind of rotate this around so we can see, okay, we have the cube kind of over here on the right hand side, and so we can focus on that. And then in this one over here we can have it on the other side. You can really start to see the different things in your scene. Now these are perspective views here, and then these are what's called orthographic views. So these you're not going to be able to orbit around. So I'm holding down F and or Alt and left clicking. I can't orbit around this because this is a complete 2D view. Right, so these are really, really helpful for when you're, especially when you're modeling or when you want to get something very, very precise. Let's say I want to move this around in only this way, but you'll notice here in the perspective view, it's not moving in and out. It's only moving along those axes because I'm moving it in my orthographic view. All right, so I'd really encourage you to kind of play around with the viewports, just kind of get familiar with moving around in 3D space if this is completely new to you. And then let's move on to these tools here. So I have used some of the hotkeys for this. I'm going to tap space in order to get back to just one perspective view. So you'll notice I've been moving things around, scaling them around. You can do that with these tools here. So this is the select tool in order to select your different objects. So just with the select tool, simple left click in order to select whatever you want. You have your lasso tool, which will allow you to select based on this marquee. So let's say I wanted to select something specific here. I could come in and hold down left click and get this very specific selection. Now in this case, I'm actually doing entire objects, but if I switch into a component mode by holding down right click, maybe come into these vertices, I can do a selection here and really just kind of fine tune that selection and then maybe make some manipulations here. So I did switch to the move tool, which is this guy right here. That is the W key on the keyboard. And then the E key on the keyboard is going to get to your rotate. R is going to get to scale. T will actually get you to this guy right here, which is whatever the last tool that you use. So if you're using something like extrude, it would be extrude. If you're using something like a slice poly tool, it'd be the slice. It's whatever the tool that you use last. You can get back to it really quickly by hitting T there. Now, the other one we didn't really talk about was this one right here. So this is your paint selection tool. And with this, you have the ability to, well, just like the tool says, you have the ability to paint your selection. So I'm going to come in actually here and just click over here to deselect everything. And then let's come back into the paint selection tool and we can come in and paint this. So I'm just left clicking and dragging in order to paint this selection. I found this is really, really helpful, especially for painting or for selecting vertices, because you'll notice as I left click and drag, if I come over here, it's not selecting anything on this side, which if I use just this selection tool and I come in here and click and drag, it's going to select everything over here. Now there are ways around that, but I find the paint selection tool is really helpful for just making sure that I'm selecting only the vertices on one side of my mesh as I'm going in there and modeling and things like that. All right, so let's hop over to the right-hand side of Maya here. So we have our channel box, our layer editor, and then our attribute editor. So the ways that you can get to this, other than this here, you can hit Control A in order to open up your attribute editor. If you hit Control A again, it will switch back to your channel box. So if for whatever reason you lose one of these, so let's say we close out of the channel box, we close out of the attribute editor, we don't have it anymore, we can hit Control A to get that back. Hit Control A again, it'll bring back our channel box. So once again, I mean, you don't have to keep these in here. If you need more space in your interface, you can do that. So the channel box essentially is going to show us a lot of the different attributes for really whatever we have selected. So in order for this to work, we have to have something selected. So I'm going to select an object. Now, right now I'm in component mode, which I have the vertices. Anytime if you right click over an object, you can select the edge, face, vertices, the UVs. When you do this, you're going to hop into a component mode. Now to get back out of component mode, you can toggle that with F8. So now I'm in object mode. I'm selecting the entire object. And now you'll notice that I have a bunch of different things in here in the channel box. So things like my translate, which is essentially kind of moving, right? So moving in X, Y, and Z. This is the value. If I type in a value of 5, that's going to move my sphere in the Y direction, which is, you can see Y is up and down, by a value of 5. So you can get very, very precise with the channel box. Let's say we wanted this to be exactly 2 units by 2 units by 2 units in X, Y, and Z. We can do that. Now, what do I mean by 2 units? Well, by default, mine is going to work in a centimeter. So this is really 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters right now. We can adjust that if we need to. Windows, setting preferences, and under the settings here, we can adjust that. But by default, centimeter. And for the most part, when you're working in Maya, unless you have a reason to be very specific, like you're working with dynamics or something that's very reliant on real world scale, you can usually get away with working in centimeters and be perfectly fine. So something that the channel box is used for a lot is really animation, because it's a really quick way of being able to animate some of these very common attributes. So let's say we wanted to take this sphere, and we want to just do some quick animation on it. We could do that by, let's say, take this, right click, key selected, and it's going to key it on frame 1. And then down here, which this is our time slider. So let's go into, say, frame 30, take this, move it down to frame 0, and then actually left clicking on the attribute name, if you right click, key selected, you'll notice it's going to add another red line. So that means that we have keys there. And now if I left click and drag, you can see we've added a little bit of animation to this sphere. Very, very cool. So the channel box is very quick way of doing animations, or really just kind of adding things very precisely, editing these attributes very precisely. You also have the ability to edit what's called construction history. So anything under this inputs here is going to be the construction history, which essentially is the history of how this particular object was created. So because we haven't done anything to this object, there's really no construction history on it per se, other than this guy right here, which was the initial creation. So as you saw before, I could change things like the subdivision for this. Depending on the object, you're going to have different options. So on this cube, I can come in and say, I want this to be value of 5 high, maybe add some subdivisions in there if you wanted to. Really, really popular way of coming in and actually tweaking some of these primitives after you've created them is using the construction history here in the channel box. Beneath the channel box, you have the layer editor. So there's 3 different types of layers that you have inside of Maya. That's these guys right here, these tabs. So you have your basic display, which is, if you've used anything like Photoshop, you'll be pretty familiar with what display layers are. Let's say we wanted to add this cube on a display layer. We can click this right here, which is going to create a new layer and then assign whatever we have selected to it. So now we have this layer. We can turn the visibility on and off. Something really cool that we can do with our display layers as well is we can actually still see it, but we can set it to maybe a templated view. So we just see the wireframe on just this object. Or maybe R, which is reference. So no matter how hard I try, I cannot select this cube anymore because it's really just referenced. So what's really cool about this is if you have a lot of objects and you're accidentally selecting things, or you really just want to kind of have an idea of where things are, but you don't really want to make any more changes to them, you can add them to a display layer and set them to reference or template, and then still see them in your viewport, but not really adjust them. And then, of course, if you need to, you can always just turn that off, and then we can select this again. All right, so if you need to add an object to a layer, so let's say we wanted to add this sphere to the layer, we could do that. We can just come in and then right-click, add selected objects to that layer. And now that's going to be on there. So if I turn this on and off, now we have both objects on that layer. Same for removing. So we can right-click, remove the selected objects. So whatever we had selected, and now if I turn this on and off, it's just got the cube in there again. And then you have similar concepts for the render layers and the animation layers. Now, I'm not really going to go into these in depth in this video just because it's a little bit outside the scope of just kind of talking about the interface. But essentially with render layers, you could say, let's say I wanted this cube to render out, but not this sphere, right? So I want it in the scene, but I don't want it to render. Or maybe I want this to render just occlusion and this to render with the lights. You could do that. You can really control what you render and what renders with other things. You can do all of that through the render layers. Similar concepts with animation layers. So with animation layers, let's say you have a walk cycle for your character and you want to be able to have the character turn its head. You could do that. You could have the walk cycle on one layer and then the head turn on another layer, which means you could turn the head turn on and off, or really kind of adding that animation into layers helps you start to control those things a lot more and really start to work a lot faster, because then if you want your character to turn its head, you could just add that on there. And then if, say, your director is just like, yeah, we don't want that head turn anymore, you can just kind of get rid of that layer and you don't have to worry about it messing up with your walk cycle or things like that. But if you're just starting off with Maya, you really don't have to worry about these two right off the bat. These are a little more advanced. Really just kind of play around with the display layers, turning them on and off, adding objects, removing objects, and you'll be perfectly fine. All right, so let's move on here. We just have a few more here at the bottom. So we talked a little bit about the time slider. This is kind of moving through time. So these are the frames. So frame 1, frame 5, frame 10. You can click in order to get those. You notice we added a little bit of animation. So when I select this, you'll see those keyframes on there. If we wanted to move this, so instead of saying frame 1 to frame 30, we wanted to move those, I can hold down Shift and then left click and drag. And what I'm doing is I'm selecting all of that. And now if I middle click and drag, I can move this. So now instead of frame 1 and 30, now that animation is on frame 61 to frame 90. So really quick way of being able to do that. Similarly, if you wanted to delete something, you could select it, right click, delete. That's going to get rid of that keyframe there. So now there's really no animation. We have this keyframe here, but we didn't tell it to move anywhere else, so it's just going to stay there. Now, as you can see in the time slider, we have 120 frames. So if you're working with, say, 30 frames per second, that'd be roughly 4 seconds, or 24 frames per second would be 5 seconds that you have here on your time slider. Now, if you need to adjust that, if you need a longer animation or a shorter animation, you can do that with this right here, and that's the range slider. So you have these two numbers on either side, and this is the start and this is the end. So let's say we needed 500 frames. Well, we can adjust this, and now we have 500 frames in our scene, but we're only looking at the first 120. So this is really helpful if, say, you're working on animation and you know that the entire shot is 500 frames, but the first day you just want to get the first 120 done. You can just focus on this, or you can even take this and shrink it down. I just want to focus on the first 30 frames, really fine tune that animation, and then you can move along and say, okay, well, let's move on to the next 30 frames and next 30 frames and so on. And you'll notice that as I'm doing this, these numbers change. So this is the overall range, right? So the start and end of the animation. And then this is the start and end of what we see here in our time slider, really just what we're going to play back in this view. So we can adjust this however we want. So first 120 frames of our 500 frame animation, and then we can move this along and we can see that. We can shrink it or make it larger to see everything. So that's the time slider and range slider. And then over here on the right-hand side, you have your playback control. So this is pretty straightforward, right? So this is going to go all the way back to the start. So it jumps to frame 1. This is going to jump all the way to the end. This is going to go back 1 frame at a time. So you can see it's going back 1 frame at a time. This is the current frame that you're on. So if we wanted to jump to frame 120, we could do that. Go back 1 frame at a time. Or go forward 1 frame at a time. This here is going to jump between keyframes. So we only have 1 keyframe here. Just to see this a little bit better, let's maybe add in a new keyframe. So add a new keyframe at frame 125. Let's say we want to jump to this keyframe. It can be kind of hard to get exactly at that point. What you can do is just jump here, and that's going to jump to that keyframe. And you can bounce between those using these guys. And then you have your actual playback, so we can play our animation forward. We can play it. I didn't actually adjust that, so we're not actually seeing that. Let's take this and just animated the Y. Let's key that. So if we play this forward, you can see our little animation there. You can play it backwards in order to see the animation backwards. Really kind of helpful to be able to see this. Now, one key thing about this playback here is this is not playing back in real time. So if you're working with, say, 24 frames per second, you're not really playing this back at 24 frames per second. This is just playing it back as quickly as the computer can process it. So you'll notice it moves really, really quickly, even though this is going from frame 60 to a frame 120. So it's really you're talking a couple seconds there, but it didn't take a couple seconds for it to move. It's because it's very simple and we're able to process that very quickly. So that's something to keep in mind. It's great for previews, but it's not going to show you the precise movement there for your playback. Kind of moving down here, we have our animation layers. If we had animation layers, we could turn them on and off, make them active. Same with character sets. This is all for animation, so if you're just getting started with Maya, don't worry about this. You really won't need to get into this until you start doing some more advanced animations and things like that. Now, down here at the bottom is perhaps one of the most important areas of Maya. And this is really something that I've learned throughout my career can really just give you a jump start to understanding how Maya works. This is your command line. So over here, you have the ability to type in a command. So if we wanted to select our polysphere, let's say select P sphere 1, hit enter, and then that will select that. So that's just typing in the code in order to actually select that. Now, over here, you're going to have the commands that happen, right? So if I come in and open this up here, this is the script editor. You'll be able to see all of the different commands. This is just going to show the last one here. But this is really, really helpful for getting to understand Maya. When I first started using Maya years and years and years and years and years ago, what I did was I had this script editor and I just opened it up on my second screen and I just looked and watched what it was doing as I was doing things. So as I'm moving around, if I select this, you can see, oh, select the cube, right? So if I wanted to do that again, I could select this, Control C, hit that, and it's going to select that cube. So what's really cool about this is we can actually take all this code, and we can start to really, really speed up our workflows and really understand how Maya is working. So let's take a look at an example of this just really quickly. Let's say I'm going to come in and let's just create a new scene just to start over. I'm going to create this brand new scene. And then in here, I'm going to come into the history, edit, clear history. That's going to clear out my script editor here. And then I'm just going to hop this over here. All right, so let's see how this can help us out. Let's say, okay, I want to create a cube. I want it to be a little bit bigger. Maybe move this over so we can see our channel box. I want this to be a value of 4. I want it to have maybe 4 subdivisions on either side. All right, there we go. So we've created this cube. Now what's really cool is we can take this. This is the code that we just generated. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to middle click and drag this down here because this is our code. We can adjust it if we need to. If I delete this, and let's say, you know, instead of actually creating a cube that is for a scale of 4 on X, Y, and Z and subdivision, let's say we want 3, right? So I'm just going to adjust these values here. And I can take this, let's hop into our custom shelf, take this, middle click and drag, and now we have this script up here. So now if I ever need a cube that has scale of 3 and our subdivisions of 3 on either side, I just did that. And it's really without even really needing to know or understand the code. And that's one really cool thing that you can do right away when you're starting to get familiar with Maya, is to hop into the script editor, see what it's doing, and just kind of look at it, right? So set ATTR. If you know that you're talking about attributes, that means it's setting the attribute. Well, then it would make sense that what attribute is it going to set? Oh, the polycube, the scale, and then this is the value. So even if you're not familiar with Mel, this can start getting you familiar with reading Mel and even customizing it and being able to create some quick things very, very fast and really get you understanding how Maya works. All right, and that about wraps up for this video. And be sure to check out some of my other tutorials over at Pluralsight. I'll add a link to those in the description. And this YouTube thing is kind of new for me, so this is one of the first videos that I'm putting out there. So if you enjoyed this, or if you have anything else Maya related that you want to know, be sure to let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.